And again, everyone, namaste, and it is absolutely my pleasure to be here with you for the ISDS Women's Group question and answer session.
Namaste, Sri Acharyaji. Thank you for taking time to talk with us today.
It's my pleasure.
I have a question about how can we as mothers help our husbands to raise strong sons, and sons that will be strong for their families later on.
First of all, of course, it begins with making sure that one has the right husband. It starts with making sure that the man who you are with is indeed someone who is himself both someone who has healthy and positive masculine traits and who knows how to pass those on to his sons. So that's the first thing. We will assume that that is indeed the case. So now, that being the case, the way that a mother supports her husband in helping to raise good sons who are, again, in a very healthy way, masculine, is by allowing him to do so. And let me explain what I mean by this. What we've seen is that the general culture today sadly encourages many women, including mothers of sons, to sadly see masculinity as something that is negative, as something that is toxic. And as a result, very often, as soon as they see their husband, begin to try to teach their son or speak to their son in a way to encourage strength, there will be kind of a knee-jerk reaction, where the mother will become almost a little bit afraid of this. Is he, speaking in too strong a way? Is he speaking in a way that is, psychologically not going to be good for my son, etc., etc. So the first thing that I would say is that, again, if you have a husband who is a healthy man, that means he's masculine, but he's also loving, he's also wise, he knows what he's doing, etc., trust him. And truthfully, of course, trust is a two-way street. Of course, the husband has to trust the wife as well. But we're talking about in this specific situation of how does a mother support the father in the raising of the children. Trust him. Trust him as much as you can. And this being the case, also understand that you are a partner in raising your son, and again, to be a eventually healthy and strong and masculine man. You are also a partner in this, in that you are trusting your husband, and that your son knows that with what is happening in the family dynamic, trying to train him to be raised in the right way, he sees that both of you are partners. And it's not just that, the father's doing all of these, let's say strength building, character building things with the son, and the mother's just kind of in the backdrop, just kind of watching. No, both of you have to be supportive of this sort of upbringing for the son. So this is the first thing that I would say. The second thing is, now you asked how to make sure that young boys grow up to be strong men, very specifically. And again, strong in not a stereotypical sort of way, but in a very healthy sort of way. Well, the best way to do this is, generally speaking, to guide your son to always be adventurous, to always challenge himself, to always seek challenges, but safely so. So in other words, yes, have your son do things that, a few generations ago, children used to do and parents didn't worry about it, Have them climb trees, have them even have friendly, nice, friendly little, wrestling matches with their friends, anything like this. Have them do physical things. Have them do things to challenge their courage. And of course, again, not crazy things, don't have them do things where their life is in danger. No, again, within reason. Where, could they possibly fall down and scrape a knee? Sure, that's fine. Again, 40, 50 years ago, that happened to every child, and it was considered normal. Now, if a child even comes within 1,000 feet of the smallest scrape on their knee, helicopter parents will come and swoop the child up, etc., etc. Well, this is not how a child grows up to be strong. The way that a child grows up to be strong and fearless is interesting. Interestingly, this dual dynamic of, on the one hand, physically not being afraid to, again, challenge himself, but interestingly, also psychologically knowing that if he goes too far, his parents are there quietly in the background to watch his back. So interestingly, both of these things together, both of these dynamics, that is the child extending himself into the world, having fun, having interesting little adventures in nature, etc., on the one hand, but then on the other hand, also knowing in the back of his mind that, oh, I'm having a lot of fun. I'm, testing all these things. Oh, let me throw rocks into the stream. Let me do all sorts of things. But he also knows that his parents have his back, and that his parents are watching over him. But again, not like helicopter parents. They're just there quietly in the background. In fact, if anything, even partaking in what the child is doing. Actually having fun with the child, but again, letting the child test his own limits. So in this way, these dual characteristics, both of which are necessary, that is strength and fearlessness, will be inculcated in the child and in the boy specifically. And truthfully, this does apply to girls too. How many wonderful, again, very healthy women are there who we know, adult women who they'll tell you, oh, they were tomboys when they were kids. So the truth is, this applies, both to boys and girls. But of course, it does indeed tend to apply a little bit more to boys. They tend to be a little bit more adventurous, etc. So I hope this provides somewhat of an answer. Does that answer your question, or do you have any follow-up questions?
It answers my question. Thank you very much. And especially as a former tomboy, it's easier almost to raise a son, I guess, for me.
Let me tell you, what I've seen is that some of the most well-functioning adult women were tomboys when they were younger. It's important to, as you're a child, it's important to be adventurous, to get dirty, to play in the mud, play in dirt, go check out nature, see, what's around the next bend, what's around the next corner, play somewhat roughhouse kind of games where, you're kind of pushing each other a little bit, maybe wrestling a little bit, etc. It only leads to adults who are then well-rounded and very psychologically healthy. And then physically too, because they got a lot of exercise when they were kids, so it's a good thing. And the question is, Namaste, Sri Acharyaji. Thank you for being here today. Absolutely my pleasure. I have a few questions. My first question is similar, but a little more specific. For women who came to Dharma after already being married and whose husbands are not yet following Dharma, how can they encourage their husbands and teenage sons to give up addictions? That is, video game addiction, you say in parentheses specifically, and develop masculine traits and skills without resorting to counterproductive means such as ultimatums, bribery, or nagging. And you have nagging in quotes. Second, how do women fit into the Varna ashrama system? All right, two very good questions actually, and the second one especially will take a little bit of time to answer, that is the Varna ashrama system. Let me deal with the first question first, and let me say that in your question itself, you said something actually that I was about to say, and that is the one way that you do this is not by nagging. You never ever want to nag. The art of communication is something that people really need to study. They used to at one time. People used to know how to communicate well. And today, of course, that's almost lost, and this is kind of a side issue, but due to the internet and so many reasons, people just don't really know how to speak with each other nicely today. And let me tell you that if you have a husband, if you have sons, oh yes, the last thing that they want to hear is nagging. But at the same time, it has to be said that communicating is different from nagging. Communicating in such a manner in which you're speaking in a pleasant way, you're not making the person feel necessarily bad or guilty or anything like this, but you are just in a very lovingly way trying to educate the person. Oh, that is absolutely something that needs to be done. But that's all just as an aside. Now let me actually answer the question as far as how one does this, how one helps a husband or sons who are not necessarily dharmic to rid themselves of addictions, and video games very specifically. First, of course, you know what I'm going to say. First, it begins with your own example. If there is a wife who sees that, oh yes, their husband, their children, oh, they have some sort of addiction to anything. Number one, the wife has to make sure that she does not. That's something that's very important. And let me say, when it comes to video games especially, this is something that I have been speaking about increasingly as time has gone on, to the point where we even released something like, maybe 12, 14-minute video where I speak about video games and how bad they are for you. But this is something that needs to be addressed. Video games are an addiction. It's not just that they're an addiction. Like with all addictions, you see, if you're addicted, just a crazy scenario, interesting scenario. If you are addicted to doing something which every time you do it, you are significantly healthier, well, that's a good addiction. You can't even call that an addiction, actually. That's something that you're doing that's good for yourself. But let's face it, the vast majority, if not all, actual addictions that people suffer from, it's a dual problem. A, there's the addiction itself, that is the fact that you have become a slave of something that is outside of yourself, and your free will is in a way taken away from you. You know, it's not a matter of, oh yes, I can choose to not do this. No, you can't. Ultimately, of course, you can, but it takes tremendous self-will. But this is the important thing, is that it is indeed an addiction. It's something that is forcing itself upon you. But then the second problem is that addictions are unhealthy. Again, that's why I gave that funny scenario. Oh, imagine if you were addicted to something that actually was healthy for you. No, the addictions that we can think of, whether drugs, alcohol, cigarettes, pornography, video games, they're not good for you. They're not healthy for you. So these are the two things to first of all understand. Now, this is why I would say, dealing very specifically with, all right, how do you convince your husband, your children of this? First of all, you do your research. It's something that's very important. Because when it comes to convincing people of anything, actually, of course you want to back up what you're saying with research. It's not that the research alone necessarily will convince them, but let's say the more verbal ammunition that you have, the more ammunition for convincing people that you have, well, the easier it's going to be. So first do your research, and there is plenty of research out there. Indeed, you can go to YouTube. It's harder these days because, of course, we know the algorithms have become quite demonic, and they try to hide actual good information. But I remember like 5-10 years ago, oh my God, you could find so much good information on how bad video games were for you. And you can still find a little bit, but look at articles, look at research if you have to. So first of all, equip yourself with this information. The other thing is that, again, as you speak with them in a very kind way. They know that you are someone who, you're not addicted to video games. That alone solves 50% of the problem, because they now have a living example living with them of what it means to be a person not playing video games, and yet you haven't died, you haven't gone crazy, nothing bad has happened to you, you haven't withered away. No, on the contrary, they see that you're someone who, you're healthy, you're calm, you're peaceful, you are a dharmi. And you don't need video games. You don't need video games to quote-unquote relax, or whatever is the excuse that they're going to give. So you see, by being an example alone, you've accomplished half your task, but now there's the other half. So yes, it does come to a little bit of persuasion, where you will have to speak with them, again, in a non-nagging way, meaning that, and let me explain what's meant by nagging. You know, people throw this word around all the time, without necessarily knowing, well, what's the difference? How do I know when I'm nagging versus just trying to communicate my concerns? And there is a difference. Nagging involves several things. First of all, constant and unyielding repetition. So in other words, if you want to communicate something to your husband, communicate something to your children, don't repeat to the point where it starts to become very, very tedious, very annoying. You know, this is true for any sort of communication. If you just repeat the same message again and again and again over a short period of time, it's the opposite of helpful to the person. So that's the first thing. Avoid too much repetition. Also in communicating, do not attempt to make the person feel bad or guilty. Don't make them feel like they've committed a sin, like they've done something to offend you personally. Rather, try to state things as much as possible in positive terms. That is, rather than saying, but you're just being so weak when you're addicted to these, instead of saying something in a negative way, rather focus on the positive. Say positive things like, listen dear, how much time do you spend playing video games a day? And let's say it's only as little as an hour. Trust me, I have known people who have played video games for 6 hours a day. Well, let's say that they say, it's an hour a day. An hour is a long period of time. Explain to them, you love doing X thing, and think of some positive thing, some healthy thing they like doing in their life. You could have done that for an hour instead. You could have had fun with me. I love talking to you. Sit down and speak with me. Let's chat. Let's have fun for an hour. Let's go for a walk. And in this way, focus on the positive as much as possible. So again, this also is the negative of nagging. With nagging, it tends to be focusing on the negative, negative, negative. You want to instead focus on the positive as much as possible. And again, the key to persuading someone we love to do the right thing is to calibrate timing with quality of message. So in other words, timing meaning, yes, you don't bother them about it every half hour. Rather, once in a while you say something. What does that mean? Well, it varies from person to person. Let's say maybe every other day, maybe twice a week you say something. So you don't say things a lot to the person, but then make sure that when you talk to them, what you say is high quality. What you say is positive. What you say is logical. It makes sense. You see, and again, this is not just a stereotype. It is a fact recognized by every traditional culture on earth. And it's neither a good thing nor a bad thing. It's simply how it is. That men tend, and not always, they tend to be a little bit more logical. Women tend to be a little bit more emotional. Keeping this in mind, try to, again, this is why you do your research. Try to have reasonable things to say to your husband, where he will think. And he will say to himself, what she says makes sense. It's not untrue. And in this way, you'll be getting him where it counts. Because again, you're appealing to the fact that, he sees himself as a rational person while you're using reason with him. So in all these ways, you do all this, and of course, you give it time. You give it time, and hopefully in time, it will come to the point where, indeed, the men in your life will give up this addiction and start doing more positive things. Another very important thing to do in helping actually anyone to overcome video game addiction is to give them a positive alternative, some other fun activity to do, rather than playing video games. So this is the last thing that I would recommend. And I actually have a lot more that I can say, but I don't want to, I want to take other questions as well. And that is this: think of other fun things that they can do. Think of fun things that they can do, fun things that all of you can do as a family, etc. It's not enough to just take away the video games. You also have to replace actually any addiction with then something that is pleasurable, but in a healthy way. So again, whatever the addiction is, someone takes drugs, they drink alcohol, whatever it is, you want to replace that in the person's life, that negative so-called pleasure that they think they're getting, with then a real and healthy pleasure. Something that's fun, that the family can do together, that both of you as a couple can do. Something. And that will be also something that will be very helpful to help wean the men in your life away from video games. You had a second question, and that is, how do women fit into the Varnashrama system? Very nice. This is actually another good question, and I will answer this. Because, of course, I've spoken about the Varnashrama system in general quite a bit. We know that Prabhupada spoke about it a lot, actually, to the point where there are 2 volumes of just collections of his writings and sayings things he spoke where he talked about the Varnashrama system. So it's something that's very important, but indeed, as far as talking about the Varna Ashrama system from the woman's perspective, that's something that is not discussed very much. And let me just say that on the one hand, what applies to men in the Varna Ashrama system also applies very much to women as well, but there are some nuances. First, let me talk about the similarities. And in the Varna Ashrama system, we are talking about two different things. First, we're talking about Varna, which are the four psychophysical classes of individuals: Brahmanas, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, and Shudras. Now, these four Varnas, and this is rather simple actually when it comes to the Varnas. The Varnas apply equally to both men and women. So in other words, there are men and women Brahmanas, there are men and women Kshatriyas, etc., etc., etc. Now, as far as men versus women exercising those roles in real life, so I'll give an example. Let's say you have a man and a woman, in fact, for that matter, a married couple, let's say, and they are both Brahmanas. Well, their nature will be very similar in that they will both be very, very sattvic. But at the same time, there will be some nuance that is there. So being Brahmanas, their profession might consist of, being teachers or scholars, etc. These sorts of professions, being advisors, people like this. This being the case, of course, being a man, being a woman, how they will fulfill those roles will maybe look a little bit different. There's more of a chance that traditionally, interestingly, that the man would be a teacher than the woman. That is the case traditionally. Of course, today when we think of teachers, we think of it the other way around, that it tends to be women who are teachers. In Vedic times, interestingly, you had both men and women teachers, but again, the roles were different. When it came to, for example, educating younger children, it did indeed tend to be women who did that. It tended to be women who were the teachers of children, let's say from the time that they begin their education, whatever that would be, 3, 4, 5 years old, up until the children reach puberty. Well, at that point, there would be a separation that would occur, where now having reached puberty, it would be more men who, for example, especially would be the teachers of boys. And that for every reason that we can imagine. Boys need a model, they need an example, they need to see a man in action, a man who, understands what they're going through, who himself has been there, etc., etc. And then for the girls, it will indeed tend to be women who will educate the girls. And this is a very healthy way of doing things in so many ways, and let me just be blunt about this, when you separate the sexes in this way, it vastly reduces the instances of abuse that could take place. Let's just, again, be blunt. If you have a grown man and, he's educating teenage girls in a class, well, that's something that could be problematic. So if instead you have women doing that, that leads to a lot less, again, potential problems, but also the same thing as I was saying about the man teaching the boys. Well, now you have a grown woman teaching the girls who she herself is an example, is a model. They can look up to her. She understands who they are, what they're going through. She's been there, she's done that, etc. So again, we can see that there are nuances when it comes to all the Varnas. And I was using the Brahmanas just as an example. You can see nuances when it comes to Kshatriyas. So for example, when it comes to Kshatriyas very specifically, it would tend to be, of course, men who would be actual warriors. But there are women Kshatriyas, they do exist, but in their case, they would be more in a supportive role. They would be individuals, in fact, I can go very deeply into this actually, the entire history of Kshatriya couples. It would tend to be the man who would be literally the warrior, who would go out there and fight, but the woman would be expert, for example, in first aid, in being a medic, in knowing that, or if her husband is injured, she knows how to literally save his life, etc. So again, the roles would be a little bit different, but they are both Kshatriyas, whether men or women, and etc. I can go down the line as far as the Varnas. Now let's talk about the ashrama system. So with the ashrama system, again, there are 4 ashramas, and these are not classes, rather these are temporal. These are 4 stages in life that people go through. So you start with the brahmachari stage, where again you are young, you are a student. Then you go through the grihastha stage, where you are married. Then vanaprastha, where you are retired. And then sannyasa, where you renounce the world entirely. So those are the 4 stages. Both men and women historically have gone through these stages. And again, with nuance, always with nuance. So let's just go through these quickly, because again, I want to leave time for more questions. When it comes to the first stage of brahmachari, indeed I spoke about that a short time ago. You have both boys and girls who are in that stage of being celibate students, which, if you're a teenager, I mean, good God, if you're 13, 14, 15, 16 years old, of course you should be celibate. But then even a little bit older than that, you should be celibate if you can until marriage. So in this first stage, you have both boys and girls. Indeed, for men, as far as the Sanskrit, celibate young students who are men are called brahmachari. Women, young girls who are celibate students, are called brahmacharini. So we know that, again, both are recognized as far as being students. So again, both are there. Then after that, of course, there is the grihastha stage. And I'm going to go through this somewhat quickly because, truthfully, to go deeply into them, I don't think is necessary, because it's kind of common sense and intuitive what the nuances would be. But again, I want to leave time for other questions. But now, having entered the married stage, we understand from the Vedic perspective what the married dynamic looks like. And again, this is in an ideal situation, which 2023 in America, in the West, in modernity, of course, we are in the opposite of ideal circumstances. So, much of this practically doesn't apply today, but this is ideally. Ideally, of course, in a married life, it is the man who earns the income, etc. The woman raises the children. The woman is the lord of the household, etc. The woman really even controls the money, etc., controls the economy of the family, etc. They have their different roles. For the man, it is indeed to be a paragon of strength. For the woman, it is to be a personification of love and nurturing, etc. So we understand these nuances that are there when it comes to husband and wife in a healthy relationship. I've spoken about this in great depth in the past with other talks. Now, when it comes to vanaprastha, and let me talk about this a little bit deeply, actually, because things are different in the Kali Yuga when it comes to the ashrama system. The ashrama system, according to the Vedic scriptures specifically, the ashrama system is a little bit different in the Kali Yuga. So the next stage is vanaprastha, where both parents, now having lived full lives, they've had children, they have grandchildren, they've retired from their jobs, etc., etc. Well, now there is the idea that both parents should focus exclusively on spirituality. And this is done stage by stage. It's not like a cold turkey sort of thing, but rather little by little, they begin to put their more material concerns aside and they focus on spirituality more and more, to the point where, indeed, they begin to live as full-time yogis. Now, they're still living together. They're still married. They are still together. They are still in the relationship, a loving relationship, etc. But again, the idea is that now they've done all of their duties in life. They are seeing their children's children before them, etc. Now is the time to focus exclusively on meditation, on puja, on God, on doing seva, on, if they can, even traveling to sacred places, sacred sites, doing pilgrimage, etc., etc. Now, when it comes to the last stage for the most part, that is sannyasa, does not apply in the Kali Yuga. Sannyasa traditionally takes place approximately at the age of 75, And traditionally, it would be at this stage that you renounce the material world altogether, and you become essentially a full-time monk. You become a full-time nun. You become someone who you are 1,000% just devoted to nothing but spirituality. You are radically celibate, etc., etc. This is a stage that is not to be followed in the Kali Yuga. Again, I've shared this verse with people in the past. I've shared it online, various places. But indeed, in the Vedic scriptures itself, it says that in the Kali Yuga we are not to practice this last stage. So of all these stages, that is sannyasa aside, the 3 stages that do still apply, interestingly, it is in the vanaprastha stage that, if one could say, there is a sense of, somewhat more equality between the man and the woman. Not so much equality, but both of them being on the exact same page as far as behavior. It is in vanaprastha specifically that occurs. And the reason why is because now you have the true basis of commonality that is being practiced, and that is spirituality. When it comes to vanaprastha, it's at this stage especially, and let me talk about this for a moment. It's at this stage especially that the man and the woman are behaving in a way that is extremely similar. That is, they are, again, focusing exclusively on spirituality. But it is also at this stage that, interestingly, there is potentially the deepest possibility of union between them, because it's a spiritual union now. There is a coming together of the husband and the wife when they are exclusively focusing on spirituality. That is the deepest communion that can be imaginable, where the man and the woman, the husband and the wife, not only are on the same page, not only are doing the same thing, but they are relating to each other as soul to soul, truly. I mean, the truth of the matter is they should be doing this throughout their relationship, of course. But it's especially in vanaprastha, when they're older, when they're retired, and when they're practicing deep spirituality together, that there is this potential for truly beautiful communion, spiritual communion between husband and wife, which again should be there nonetheless, but it's especially at this last stage that you can especially see this. So, long answer. I hope that answers both questions for you.
I was wondering, going back to the question about raising boys, I was wondering if you could touch on how women can raise strong but feminine daughters, given the context of, that, like, our generations who are mothers now, we've been predominantly raised in, like, a modern feminist dominant culture, and we're still somewhat trying to deprogram ourselves from those messages. How do we raise our daughters in this setting? What are some of the most important messages that we can give to them, and how do we set that example ourselves, again, when we're trying to somewhat deprogram ourselves from this modern feminist mentality?
Absolutely. Very, very good question. And let me just say, counter-messaging. Counter-messaging from every possible perspective, from every angle imaginable, but especially, again, as I've repeated several times, by personal example. And let me go a little bit deeper into this and what I mean by this. Yes, indeed, this is the problem that we are facing today. When I say today, I mean for, several generations now, is that, sadly, very healthy traditional lifestyles, behaviors, attitudes, ways of being, worldview, etc., have been under truly concerted attack. It's not an accident. It's not just, this is the direction the culture is going in. No, it's been on purpose that, indeed, anything that has been traditional has been under very purposeful attack. This being the case, what we are to do is, in fact, let me back up a little bit before I even talk about what to do. something that, first of all, needs to be recognized. And I'm sure everyone I'm talking to today, you already recognize this. But still, for those who will be listening to this later and don't, we, number one, need to recognize that despite where the culture has been going, which has been in a bad direction, very few people will deny that today. Just a small, tiny handful, maybe 3% of the population who are truly brainwashed would disagree with this. Things have been going in a very, very bad direction. And number one, we need to realize that despite the fact that we may seem like we're in a minority, that we want to follow a countercurrent from where mainstream culture has been going, we need to understand that we need to be strong. We need to indeed exercise this countercurrent. We need to not be dissuaded by anyone who will say to us, oh, but what are you trying to do? You're trying to live in the dark ages, and you want your daughters to be oppressed and to be slaves to them, and etc., etc. All these truly caricatured, stereotypical sort of pseudo-arguments that are made. Number one, we need to be strong. And we need to realize that, oh yes, even if it seems like I'm in the minority in exercising what I know to be the case, I need to live a positive and a good traditional and authentic dharmic lifestyle nonetheless. So that's the first thing, is as far as our mood. Our mood has to be strong, in other words. And I said this the last time, I believe, when we had our last women's Q&A. Women have to be strong. It's not just that men have to be strong. When we speak about strength today, this applies not just to men. It also applies to women in a different way. But women have to be strong in that when you yourself hear all these messages from television, from the movies, you go girl, all these, feminist messages where we know that they're destructive, we need to be strong and stand up to it regardless. Now, all that being said, when it comes to having girls, indeed, we need to give them counter-messaging. What is meant by this is, in the same way that television, movies, even music, actually, everything, tries to brainwash them into, indeed, accepting the feminist agenda, we need to show them images, we need to show them movies, etc., that show the opposite. It's interesting, I spoke in this context when it came to men, how men need to start watching older movies that showed strong men. There are almost no movies today that show strong men. Men are shown as idiots or as very warped, violent, etc. Well, in the same way, girls have to be shown older films where women are not silly. No, they can be intelligent, they can be strong, but they are truly feminine. They're not trying to compete with the men. They're not superheroes where they're 5 foot tall and they're battling all these massive guys who are 6'5" and beating them all up. It's a fantasy that does not correspond to reality. No, we need to avoid all of this modern media and show them reality. Women who, yes, they are strong, they are intelligent, they wish to accomplish good, healthy things, but they are also feminine. They appreciate their men. They love masculine men. And they do things that are feminine. They're not afraid to be beautiful. Let's talk about this very deeply. Beauty is something that in Vedic culture, in all dharmic cultures, we celebrate. We celebrate beauty. Again, this is true for Vedic culture. Look at Vedic art. My Lord, it is nothing but a celebration of beauty. Look at pre-Christian European arts and culture. Beauty everywhere you look, in the sculpture, in paintings, in architecture, etc., etc. And when it comes to human beings also, both men and women traditionally try to look their best. But it is women especially who in their lives, they personify beauty. They do everything they can to make themselves look beautiful, etc. Well, that's frowned upon today. It mustn't be. Girls and women should be encouraged to, in a very tasteful way, of course, with dignity, make themselves look beautiful. Yes, indeed, wear beautiful dresses, wear flowers in your hair, just in innocent, natural ways like this. Celebrate who you are as a person. Celebrate the beauty that you are. Celebrate the natural propensities and skills that you have. People know this. This experiment has been done hundreds and hundreds, thousands of times. In real life, it's been done millions of times, where you have a boy and a girl, let's just pick an age, let's say 3 years old. On one side of the room, you've got building blocks and little toy soldiers, etc., little toy trucks, things like this. On the other side of the room, you have dolls, you have little kitchen play set, etc. You take the boy, you take the girl, you put them in the center of the room. 99% of the time, the boy will go for the masculine toys, the girl will go for the feminine toys. That being the case, and of course there are exceptions, who cares? The exceptions don't matter. 99% of the time, that is what will happen. And that is the general principle that we are to follow. That being the case, indeed, girls have to be allowed and in a gentle way encouraged to do those things that come to them naturally. They are attracted to, indeed, taking care of those that are smaller than them and dependent upon them. So they love to take care of dolls. They love to take care of baby dolls, things like this, etc. They love to have tea parties, etc. We have to encourage them to do such things. Again, not force, just gentle encouragement. Give them what they want, give them what they need, etc. We need to, when they get a little bit older now, so let's say we're not talking about a 3-year-old, we're talking about, a 7, 8, 9, 10-year-old girl. We are to teach them feminine skills. What does that mean? Yes, that means working in the kitchen. How do you work your way around the kitchen? You have to get to know the kitchen very well. How do you bake? How do you cook? How do you do things like this, etc.? And on and on. I don't need to go through the entire litany of what are more feminine skills versus masculine. But indeed, we are to encourage them in this way. So indeed, we should surround them by counter-messaging. That means in the books that we read to them. That means in the movies that they see, etc. I should touch upon that for a second. That's another thing I forgot to mention. The books that they read. I cannot even tell you how demonic, I'm sure many of you know, so-called children's books have become today. And when I say today, I mean the last several years, 2, 3, 5 years, something like this. They have become demonic. And I don't use that word lightly. I can't go too deeply into the specifics of this because, this video will be available to the public and we don't want to be censored. But indeed, there is sexual content and all sorts of content that should not be there in a book that is meant for a 6 or 7-year-old child, and yet it's there today. No, we need to read them books that are classical in nature, classical literature. Meaning things like, Little Women, The Little Men. There are 2 separate books. We need to read them, Swiss Family Robinson. We are to read them, the Iliad and the Odyssey. Truly classical literature. Of course, Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, etc. We need to read them literature that shows traditional, healthy, happy, spiritual lifestyles. So in this way, again, counter-messaging, using our own example, etc. Yes, we are to, women, mothers are to teach their girls what it means to be women. So I hope does that answer the question for you?
Yes, it does. I guess I was wondering too, for the other part of that being, as women who are, ourselves kind of trying to work our way out of the feminist mentality, and we may not have learned a lot of these things. How do we teach that when we're kind of learning it ourselves?
Mm-hmm. Yes. And let me tell you, sadly, this is probably the answer. Both you and your daughters need to learn this together. This is the problem. It's so much easier to destroy than to build. So the problem is that all of these non-dharmic, anti-dharmic, I should say, ideologies, having destroyed what were at one time healthy family structures, healthy family cultures, Now that these need to be rebuilt, yes, it's difficult in that even the parents themselves very often are themselves, let's say, students of the traditional, and they themselves are still learning. So sadly for many people, it is a situation in which both parents and children are learning. Of course, it's important that you not necessarily make this too obvious to your children because, of course, they look up to you as the example. But this being the case, yes, the adults also, women also need to do counter messaging for themselves. In other words, they need to rewire their own way of thinking, their own way of perceiving, their own way of being, simultaneously with also trying to be an example for their daughters. So this being the case, yes, it does make things a little bit more difficult. But yes, the mothers also have to, as much as possible, look for resources. And I know that there are good resources that are out there. Sadly, a lot of them tend to be more from a Christian perspective, but that's all right. They're still very, very useful in many cases. I'm hoping that in the future, and now that there is a women's group, an ISDS women's group, I'm hoping that you yourselves, as time goes on, will start to create those resources. But yes, there has to be resources as far as not just classical literature, but even good modern books that have been written that are, for example, critiques of feminism, critiques of, the entire LGBTQ plus whatever ideology, etc., etc. So I'm sure that there are many, many good modern books that are available as well. Again, a lot of them come from a Christian perspective, but some of the information is still very useful. But yes, it's important for our Vedic women to begin to create these resources as far as books, as far as good videos that are available, as far as articles, etc., research. And it is a matter of, indeed, educating yourself as well. It's a very unfortunate thing when our culture has been so warped and for so many generations to the point where both as men and women, many of us were born in a dysfunctional culture. And as a result, what happens is we realize the dysfunction, we want to be functional, and we ourselves need to restore a natural way of being, even in ourselves, what to speak of then transfer that to our children. So yes, we have to understand that we ourselves are students. We have to understand that we ourselves are growing in what is a truly healthy and traditional understanding of what it means to be men, what it means to be women, etc. And in that way, as we grow, we also help our children to grow. So, is that a little bit helpful?
Yes, it is. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. But yes, like I said, it's always easier to destroy than to rebuild. But we are going to rebuild. And as far as women coming to the point of completely ridding themselves of these poisons of modernity, it can be done, it will be done. You never give up, you just continue little by little to learn more and more, have more and more realizations of what it means to truly live as a true woman. And yes, in time you will come to a point of balance and of happiness and of peace in who you are, and knowing that you are a wonderful example for your daughters and for all of your children. So yes, please just always have hope and continue to do the good things that you're doing to come to this point. Very good. And are there any other questions?
I have a few other questions, kind of relating to still modern topics, and well, I guess they're in response to some very popular viral things, if you will, that have been going around for, well, recently, I don't know for how long. But these are more practical, and so I'm wondering, within the context of a relationship between a man and a woman, is it possible for a man and a woman to have a healthy relationship long term if the woman is the breadwinner in the family, given that, with a lot of the ways in which larger companies are going with promoting women based on just that they're women? Or will that ultimately end up in dissatisfaction and problems? And is it possible for women to fulfill their feminine roles as well as providing for the family? Or does this ultimately lead to disharmony?
Excellent question. That's a very good question. And yes, this is a question that pertains to modernity very specifically. The family has been forced into this very precarious situation in which to have a household in which it is the man who is the sole earner of money and the woman can stay home, etc., take care of the children. It's become very, very, very difficult today. And it's not that some people don't do this. No, there are many families in which, again, yes, the wife does not have a job. Her job is indeed to take care of the children, take care of the household, even homeschool, etc. The husband is the sole breadwinner. There are families that are like that. Oh, but it is difficult, and it's difficult by design. Or you may have a situation where, as you said, maybe both the husband and the wife are bringing in the income, but the woman is bringing in a little bit more. So yes, this is the situation as we find it today. And on the one hand, we need to acknowledge, in a very realistic way that, oh yes, this is how things are. But we are also to understand how things should be, not merely how things are, but we also have to understand how things should be. And the way that things should be, ideally, is how indeed they were in the past. And that is that, yes, it should be ultimately that in an ideal situation, it is the man who is the earner of income. The wife should be able to stay home, take care of the children, take care of the home, etc., etc. That's the ideal situation. Or when both individuals are forced to work, it should be the case that the man is making more than the woman. We've seen statistically, we've seen through research that, if the woman is making a little bit more than the man, well, then it's not too much of a problem. If there's somewhat of a close equity in what they're bringing in. But when there's a dramatic difference, let's say the man is a laborer and, he's being paid an hourly wage versus the woman is an executive and she's being paid $300,000 a year as an executive. The guy is bringing in maybe $25,000 a year. What we've seen is that the greater the disparity, then yes, the more disharmony that there is in family life. So indeed, again, ideally speaking, it would be wonderful if we can come to the point again where, practically speaking, it's economically feasible that the man can be the person who goes out of the home, does the work, has a serious job, etc., brings in the income, and the woman doesn't have to have a job. She can have a job if she desires. You see, there's a difference between having to work versus, wanting to work. If a woman wants to work, it's always been the case that certainly, women can do something to bring in a little bit more income into the household. But it should be the case that she doesn't need to work. She can work if she wants to. Or she can have, let's say, a home business, something like this, where she's working from home, doing something like that. So yes, that would be the ideal altogether. So again, when both are forced to work, it should be the case that the woman is not making dramatically more than the husband, because yes, that is bad for the husband's self-esteem, etc. There are other psychological problems that creep in. The greater the disparity, the greater the disharmony will be. Again, if there's a small disparity, the woman's making just a little bit more, that's all right. But again, the ideal is that the man should be making more than the woman, A, and B, even more ideally, the woman should not have to work unless she wants to. So, does that answer the question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
My pleasure. And we have a little bit more time. Any other questions?
There is a question in the chat here, and I can read this for you. This is a question from somebody who couldn't today, but is a member of the women's group. She wanted to ask how to stay How to stay sane and create a joyful and peaceful life, trying to balance work and family life.
Life has become so crazy today to the point where, to just have a very happy, healthy, stable family life where everything is running nicely and, there is time. See, this is the thing. What produces so much anxiety today especially is the fact that everyone feels they're rushing. There's no time. There's no time for anything. There's no time to sit down with the people you love. There's no time to just do happy, pleasurable leisure things, etc., etc., etc. So what happens is that people just feel that they have no time for anything, and this causes tremendous anxiety. Versus, again, in the past, and I've said this to many people because I'm old enough, I remember what things were like all throughout the 70s, from the early to the late 70s, in the 80s, and the further back you went, it just seemed like people had all the time in the world. It just seemed like time was somehow miraculously stretched. It seemed like a 24-hour period felt more like 72 hours, at least to me and many of the people I knew who were alive back in the 70s, and that is not the case anymore. So indeed, this question is correct. People just feel like it's impossible to even stay sane when you never have time for anything. You're just constantly working or going to and from work. You run home and you have just enough time when you're finally at home to cook, say hi to the kids, and not much else. Well, let me say several things about this. First of all, and I'm going to answer this not just for the person who asked the question, but again, I'm going to answer this in general for anyone watching this video in the future. First of all, it goes back to what we were saying in several circumstances earlier with this Q&A session. First of all, people need to strive to create a traditional lifestyle and marriage and family life for themselves. So in other words, it must come to the point where in time, so let's say that first of all we're talking about the typical family today where indeed the man and the woman, they're both working full time, they have no choice, they think, but to put their kids in daycare, etc., etc. So the typical family. Well, it needs to get to the point where that husband and that wife begin to strategize. And to strategize with this aim, to in time make it economically feasible that they can begin to live a traditional Vedic, a traditional spiritual lifestyle, and whatever they need to do. So if this means that, for example, the man, in addition to working, maybe he needs to increase his education a little bit, he needs to take some night classes, he needs to get then a better job, making more money. And the woman can now begin to reduce her workload. Instead of working full-time, work part-time, half the time. And then with the idea of eventually she won't have to work at all. Oh my Lord, now she can take care of the children. And she can read them books in the daytime, not just at night. She can begin going into nature with them and teaching them, etc., etc. So this is the first thing I would say. It's hard, but with enough willpower, with enough determination, it can be done. The couple need to begin doing whatever is necessary, making whatever arrangements, whatever changes in their life they need to change, such that they can begin to live a more traditional lifestyle. That's the first thing that they have to do. The second thing that they have to do is, of course, as much as possible, all throughout, they need to introduce serious spirituality into their family as much as possible. Spirituality is a positively stated double-edged sword. And let me explain what I mean by this. It positively gives us joy, it positively gives us meaning in life, fulfillment, etc. But then it also reduces its opposite. It also reduces anxiety. It also reduces fear. It reduces just any negative sort of emotions or reactions that might be there. This being the case, we need to truly make spirituality the center of our life. And when I say this, let me go a little bit deeper. It actually is not enough if, let's say, one of the parents is very spiritual, the other one is a little bit, at least open-minded. No, both parents must be spiritual, and more. the family has to be spiritual. In other words, people have asked me about this in the past. And that is, what do you do if, let's say, even both parents are spiritual, but the kids aren't really? No, the kids have to be encouraged to be spiritual as well. In traditional households, and this is true regardless of the religion, regardless of, if you were raised a traditional Catholic or Muslim or again, Vedic or Buddhist or whatever, the idea is that the family are a unit and they do things as a unit. The family has to practice spirituality together. It doesn't matter if your children are just born. A baby can have a spiritual life, actually. When you do puja, make sure that even the baby is in the room with you. It doesn't matter if the child is 10, if it's a teenager, etc. So this is something that is very important. Introduce deep spirituality into your family as much as possible. But again, with this idea of, as much as you can, trying to transition your family from being what it may be now, that is, typical Vedic family of modernity, to then becoming a more traditional sort of Vedic family. And in this way, if you do these two things, that transition that I mentioned, but also incorporating spirituality into your family's life as much as possible, this will help. This will truly help. The last thing I'm going to say, make the most of the time you have. Remember how I began speaking about this entire problem of remaining sane, how to remain sane in family life. What is the problem? People feel like they have no time. Make the most of the time that you do have. In other words, when you do have spare time, and this is hard for some people, because some people, they work so hard. They'll work for 10 hours a day, and then again, battling traffic and all that, have to cook, etc., etc. Some people feel that once they finally have a little bit of time, all that they have the energy to do is just sit there and just relax. Well, that's all right. Relaxation is important too, but relax in a constructive way. In other words, when you do have that time when you're not working, you're not cooking, etc., do things that are wonderful. Take your family, find whatever nature is close to you, even if it just means a park. Go for a walk. Breathe in deeply. It means, if you're going to watch some entertainment, which is fine, watch something that is elevating in every way. Watch a beautiful film together. It means indeed to do spiritual things. It means indeed read together as a family. This is something people used to do. That was a beautiful tradition. I know, because I know the history of the whole world really, but especially America. In the 19th century, in the 18th century, families would come together and they would have literature nights. And these were not necessarily highly educated people. We're talking about common people who they would come together. And again, this was 18th, 19th century, primarily Christians in America. So, of course, they would read the Bible together. But they would also read literature. They would read poetry. Who is the famous poet who is on the scene today? John Keats, whoever was alive at their time. And they would read poetry to each other, and they would discuss it, etc. Well, why does such a wonderful, beautiful, aesthetic, literary activity have to be something relegated to the past? Start to do this as a tradition today with your family. Even if it means half an hour, that's all I have time for. All right, half an hour, the family gets together, and you read something beautiful together. You take turns, etc. So in this way, again, I'm speaking about many, many things at once, but indeed we need to have a more traditional family structure. We have to transition ourselves toward that. We need to have spirituality in the center of our lives, and we need to do the most with the time that we have. Read books together, do good things together, do spiritual things together, etc. Use your time in a good way. Use that time. Again, if the husband needs to increase their education a little bit, take night classes so that they can make more money, so that, again, the wife doesn't have to work as much and she can focus on the family. You do all these things as much as is feasible. And that will hopefully begin to make you begin to feel sane again in our crazy modern age, and to have joy and peace in your life.
I don't want to hog all the questions, but I do have a couple here, and this question I would like to ask, I think all of us know the answer who are present, but I'd like to ask this because, again, there's a lot of really awful messaging going around that I think is confusing for a lot of young women today, and I think it's culturally relevant and necessary. So I hope you'll forgive me if it's not or a little out of context, but I would like to ask, mostly for the audience, is it true that it is inherent and natural in men to cheat or need multiple partners, and how do women deal with cheating if it happens in their relationship?
Oh, the Andrew Tate nonsense. Oh my Lord. Yes, let me talk about this. Actually, just as an interesting aside, I forget which video it was. It may have actually been maybe The Art of Manhood, or maybe it was a video that came out after that. I think it was a video where I was answering questions about masculinity, actually, where I actually denounced Andrew Tate, and it was decided to edit that out of the video, which is very unfortunate. But again, this video came out like a year and a half ago. Yes, it's individuals like him who say such things that, oh yes, it is natural for men to want to sleep around. It is just biologically in their masculine nature, excuse me, but to spread their seed as far and wide as possible. And they'll come up with all sorts of biological, genetic reasons for why this is the case, evolutionary biology, blah, 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 blah. And no, this is of course just an excuse for males who are actually just really boys in mentality, even though they may have adult men bodies. They're really just boys in mentality. It's just an excuse for them to sleep around and to quote unquote, enjoy hedonistically. No, it is not natural for men to cheat in any way, shape, or form. It's not natural for anyone to cheat, for that matter. It's not natural for women to cheat. It's not natural for men to cheat. What we have seen instead is that, again, in modern times, as the family has broken down, as the natural institutions that have traditionally been there also have broken down, as we've been deprived of religion, of spirituality, of heroism, of government that we can have faith in, etc., etc. As communities have broken down, what we've seen is that as a very natural consequence of this, morality has been thrown out of the window, and as a result, for the last, maybe 45 years, since really the early 70s is really when this started. First, it started as a purely urban phenomenon, but then again, the media forced this upon the entire nation, the entire world, so then it became more widespread. The idea that fidelity is for old-fashioned fuddy-duddies. That the idea of having a faithful marriage is just for people who aren't hip, people who are just old-fashioned. No, no, no. The thing to do is, come on, get with modern times. You need to just sleep around as much as possible and, quote-unquote, enjoy life as much as possible, have as many sexual partners as you can, etc. YOLO, you only live once, and blah, 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 blah. Not one of these pronouncements has led to 1/10 of an ounce of joy or fulfillment or satisfaction on the part of any human being. On the contrary, these ways of thinking have led to unlimited tonnage of misery on the part of both men and women. So indeed, this idea that it is natural to cheat, to sleep around on the part of either men or women is absolute nonsense. No, what we've seen is that in civilized societies, that is, societies that are high-trust societies, that are well-functioning, healthy societies, that are dharmic in nature, that are spiritual, what we've seen is that faithful monogamy is something that's very natural for the vast majority of individuals in those societies. Now again, as I always have to say as a philosophical statement, exceptions are always there for any specific rule. The exceptions are unimportant and uninteresting. So you can have the most dharmic society. Will you have one guy who's going to cheat on his wife? Sure. And that proves nothing. That proves nothing. What we've seen is that in any well-functioning Vedic dharmic civilization, the vast majority of individuals are satisfied and happy and fulfilled being in faithful monogamous relationships. And that indeed, the more well-functioning and high-trust a society is, the less reason there is for anyone to cheat. And it comes to the point where, no, it's not the norm at all. Indeed, it's almost unthinkable. So no, a well-functioning society is one in which you have radical monogamy, you have one man with one woman, they eventually get married, they have children, and they are together for the rest of their lives until one of them passes away. And that's what separates them, nothing else. Not divorce, not, I just fell out of love. No, they are together forever until one of them leaves the planet. And the other mourns for the rest of their life that their partner is no longer there. And they eventually leave. That is how things function in a purely dharmic society, that you have true love. You have a man and a woman who fall in love and who are together, who are bound together, till death do them part. There's a reason why that vow exists. And indeed, cheating? No, cheating is for animals. Polyamory, sleeping around, multiple partners, open relationships, blah, blah, blah. You're describing a dog. You're describing a dog. You're describing a cat. You're describing some lower animal. Are humans capable of doing such abominable things? Of course, humans are capable of doing anything. But that's the difference between someone who is human merely in form versus someone who is truly human, civilizationally, and in their own sense of dignity. They don't cheat. The man does not cheat, the woman does not cheat, and instead they have a loving relationship for the rest of their lives together. And more, their children see this, and their children grow up bathed in the love of their parents, nourished by the love that they see that their parents have for each other. This is what we aim toward when it comes to Vedic marriage. Does that answer the question?
Yes, that's wonderful to hear and very reassuring. I'm glad you were so clear about that. If we have time, I do have one last question that I think is a great ending question, and we'll wrap everything up.
Sure.
What is the role of women who come to the ISDS specifically? How do we fit in, and how can we help Dharma to grow in society in general? How should we see our responsibility as women coming into the ISDS?
As women coming into the ISDS, this is what women have to look forward to. Women are entering a culture that will help them as individuals to truly be, in every sense of the term and on every level of who they are, their true selves. That being the case, and first we'll just talk individually, as far as literally, individually, subjectively, what women are to experience when they come into the ISDS. What they will find is that they are in a movement, in a culture. The ISDS, more than a movement, it's also a culture. Indeed, it itself is becoming a civilization. It's a community. And what they will find is that they are joining a community in which they can truly be their true selves. And what does that mean? It means that they can be, let me tell you what to me is the ideal woman. The ideal woman is someone who, in everything that she is absolutely feminine. And, we don't have to go deeply into what is meant by that. We know what is meant by feminine. But who also is someone who is highly intelligent, someone who yearns to be wise, someone who wishes to certainly take care of their family, but also do seva, that is, do things to help them to make the world better in every way. They wish to serve Dharma. They wish to help in whatever way they can to help to heal people, because they look around themselves and they know that there's so much pain that is now there in the world due directly to the fact that people have abandoned Dharma. They see this and it breaks their heart, and they wish to heal people, etc. They want to know God. They want to know themselves. They want to do meditation. They want to do the sadhanas that are necessary in order to deepen who they are, their knowledge of themselves, their relationship with God. They want to increase their wisdom, increase their knowledge. They want to learn as much as possible, etc. So this is an ideal Vedic woman. They are someone who they make the family the center of their lives. They are very feminine, but in addition to their family, they also make their spiritual life the center of their lives, both personally, but then when it comes to helping the world around them. If this is what they wish to have, if what I just described is what a woman is aiming toward, if this is her goal, then she will find fulfillment in the ISDS. Now, let me speak a little bit more practically. When it comes to joining the ISDS, women have every opportunity, practically speaking, in the ISDS. You know, I've spoken about this in the Shakti principle. I've spoken about this in talks so many times. Anything spiritually that a woman aspires for, she can achieve in the ISDS. In other words, she has leadership capabilities. We encourage women to be leaders in the ISDS. Again, in accordance with their nature, of course, not artificially so, not trying to pretend that I'm here to lord it over all the men and get revenge over the men in that way, blah, 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 all this sort of feminist way of thinking. No. If a woman wishes to be a leader, she can be a leader in the ISDS. Indeed, we have women. We have women in charge of projects, etc. Several of our top leaders are women, actually. For those involved in the ISDS, for those who are in this Discord channel right now, this includes some of you, others you already know of personally, etc. So indeed, we encourage women to become leaders. We encourage women to become completely involved in the ISDS as far as working on all the projects that we have, as far as doing outreach, as far as participating in the Discord discussions, as far as participating in any of our events that take place, whether here in Omaha. If, for those of you who have not been here, if you come visit our Omaha temple, you'll see that it's almost 50-50, men and women that we have here. And the women take part in everything just as much as the men. Sometimes we'll have a man do a puja, sometimes we'll have a woman do a puja. Women lead bhajans, women do seva here as much as the men do, etc., etc. Indeed, we're going to have a painting party in a week. I know half the people doing the painting are going to be our women who are here locally, etc. So indeed, when it comes to devotional opportunities, spiritual opportunities, even leadership opportunities, seva opportunities, etc. Yes, this is a place where we encourage women to do all of the above. Let me also say this, however, that indeed this being a movement that is radically traditionalist in outlook, where indeed we're not new agey, we're not modernists in any way whatsoever. On the contrary, we follow Sanatana Dharma in as authentically traditional a way as possible. All that being said, we also take the position where women are to be protected, and we don't shy away from this. Indeed, it is a man's duty to protect women, to protect, first and foremost, of course, the women in his life, so certainly his wife or his fiancée or girlfriend, his daughters, mother, etc., etc., but also really to protect all good and innocent women. And this is kind of the unspoken attitude of the ISDS. You'll see that our men tend to be in a very loving way, in a very healthy way, very protective over our women. So thus, we don't allow abuse of any kind to take place in the ISDS toward women. That means verbal, that what to speak of anything worse than that, what to speak of physical or anything like that. No, we protect our women. We make sure the ISDS is a community that is safe for women to thrive as women in every way. So indeed, this is the position that the ISDS takes. That's not just a position, it's what we live. Too many people have positions on things, but without then living it through. No, this is how the ISDS functions. This is how we operate, actually, as a community. Is that, indeed, women feel very, very comfortable here. Indeed, in the many, many decades that I have run the ISDS, I have not been aware of any woman who's complained about, there's just no room for growth in the ISDS as a woman, they're anti-woman. I've never had one complaint. Indeed, women come here and they feel that they can, on the one hand, operate as true women, being feminine, but on the other hand, they have complete freedom to grow and grow and grow as much as they desire and they wish within the ISDS. So does that answer the question?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for expanding on that quite a bit. Thank you, Acharyaji, and thank you so much for the time that you've given us today and answering all of these very relevant questions.
Great. Well, thank you again so much for having me on here and for doing this Q&A with me. It's been absolutely my pleasure to take this time and to answer all of your wonderful questions. And with that, again, I thank you all very much for being here. Namaste. And Jaya Shriman Narayana. And all of you, everyone, please take very good care of yourselves.